Good morning and welcome to this, the 15th meeting of 2013 of the European External Relations Committee. Can I make the usual request that all mobile phones and electronic devices are switched off as the broadcasting people, it hurts their ears. Before we actually start today's committee, can I record a special thanks to Lauren Spaven-Don, who's moving on from our committee. And just to pay tribute to Lauren, Lauren came to the committee and took on a piece of work in looking at our China plan and helping this committee along with the report and all the visits and all the media that went around that, and worked very closely with Sal on that, and we get a fantastic result with that report. So we wish you all the best. We thank you for all the work that you've done, but we hope to see you again, and whoever's getting you, Lauren, is getting a very, very amazing worker, so good luck. Thanks very much. Okay, committee agreed with that, yeah? Okay. So agenda item 1, before I move on quickly, we have an apology from Helen Eady. She's not going to come along to committee this morning, so but she has tendered her apologies. But agenda item 1 is a decision to take agenda item 8 in private. It's our deliberations on the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator's visit last week. So committee agreed to do that? Agreed. Yep. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is our discussion with the Cabinet Secretary, and welcome Cabinet Secretary and to your staff members too. The primary focus of today's evidence session is on the Scottish Government's action plan, and you should have a copy of the action plan in your papers. And we will also be discussing the UK's balance of competencies review and the work that's going on there. And there's a letter, hard copy letter on your desk, and another letter in your papers from the Cabinet Secretary. So welcome Cabinet Secretary, and welcome to your officials this morning. We have Karen Watt, who's the Director of External Affairs. Good morning, Karen. And we have Colin Imrie, who's the Deputy Director of European and UK Relations. Good morning to you, Colin. Cabinet Secretary, can I invite you to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you very much, Convener, and thank you again for the invitation to appear before the committee, again to give you an update on the Scottish Government's progress on our European engagement under the Lithuanian presidency. This, of course, is an important and exciting time for the Scottish Government and our European relations. Yesterday, of course, we marked a year to go until the Scottish people get to vote on Scotland's future. In EU terms, the benefits are clear. An independent Scotland with a seat at the table will be able to contribute to a wide range of matters, including energy, maritime affairs and innovation. This government sees clear benefits to EU membership. Scotland should remain part of the European Union, given the benefits of free movement and access to a single market, covering more than 500 million fellow European citizens and around 20 million businesses. It also is the destination for around half, 46% of our Scottish exports. Already, Scotland, like so many other smaller states, plays an active part within the EU. Our EU engagement is guided by our action plan, which we sent you the latest update last month, which covered our work under the Irish presidency and looked ahead to the current Lithuanian presidency. I know the committee is looking forward to hearing evidence from the Lithuanian ambassador in October. The Scottish Government's work continues to be guided by our 4 priority areas: energy and climate change, marine environment, research and creativity, and justice, freedom and security. Throughout 2013, ministers have continued to attend councils to put forward Scotland's views. For example, we successfully pressed the UK to raise the issue of mackerel, a key interest for Scotland, at the May Council meeting. We've hosted events both in Scotland and in Brussels to develop our thinking and provide Scottish expertise to our European neighbours. Both ministers and Scottish Government officials have attended numerous EU-related events to put Scottish views across. We've also welcomed European Commissioners to Scotland throughout the year. The Trade Commissioner, Commissioner De Hocht, is coming next week, coinciding with the celebrations marking the year to go until we host the Ryder Cup in Gleneagles. This will provide us with an opportunity to discuss the EU-US trade agreement, or the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, as it's known, which is an important deal for the people of Scotland. We've also hosted Commissioners Oettinger, Potocnik and Hahn, covering energy, environment and regional policy, respectively, in recent months. The visits of the Commissioners have been an excellent opportunity to drive forward our work on our EU priorities. It's provided us with a platform to share best practice with our European partners. For example, the Deputy First Minister had a useful discussion with Commissioner Hahn on structural funds when he visited Scotland earlier this month, and took the opportunity to highlight the importance of Scotland's islands to cohesion policy. Current programmes on structural funding are operational from 2007 to 13, and Scotland was allocated €820 million for these. We've made good progress on delivering the funds, and most of those allocated were awarded by the end of 2010. Across Scotland, the funds have been used to support projects that provide training and support for individuals to enter employment, provide advice to businesses, boost capital expenditure and improve access to finance for SMEs. We're also taking advantage of further opportunities through EU competitive funding, that is those funding programmes managed by Brussels rather than on a regional basis. And our commitment to ensuring that Scotland becomes an innovation nation aligns well with EU policy aspirations, and we welcome the scale and ambition of the EU's future research and innovation policy Horizon 2020, and I know the committee has taken a keen interest in that in particular. We've already committed a minimum of £45 million of annual expenditure to Smart Scotland in each year of the spending review, and a more strategic approach has been taken to the new round of EU competitive funding with a particular focus on Horizon 2020. To make the most of these EU opportunities, we've developed a Scottish support framework for Horizon 2020, and that brings together the resources of government, our enterprise agencies, Scottish Funding Council and Scotland's Europa. And significant preparatory work is being done now to prepare for the regular calls which will be issued under these programmes from 2014. You'll also be aware that there's much happening at EU level more widely and generally. We're mindful, obviously, of the ongoing issues in the Eurozone and of the need for the EU to reach agreement on banking union proposals. I'm pleased that the political agreement on the £960 billion EU multi-annual financial framework for 2014-20 was reached in July between the Council and Parliament. The next MFF and the money that is provided for key priorities such as agriculture, fisheries, research, climate change and key infrastructure priorities such as energy, transport and digital is vital to Scotland's future economic development. So I'm sure that committee members will support me in urging the European Council and Parliament to ratify the final MFF implementing regulation next month so that the new programmes can begin next January. As members know, the European parliamentary elections will be held next May, and there'll be a new European Commission and President with a new refreshed agenda next year. European Commission President Barroso recently gave his final State of the Union address to the European Parliament. He set out the achievements of his term against the difficult economic backdrop of the Eurozone crisis and high youth unemployment. And he reiterated the benefits of Member States working together to resolve the crisis and criticised those who would seek to turn away from Europe at this time. And that is an approach that contrasts with the risks being created, of course, by the UK government's ongoing threats to exit the EU. And obviously I understand that the committee heard from David Lidington before recess on the UK government's approach to the EU. I've underlined that this government is committed to the European Union and sees the benefits in Scotland's continuing membership, both for the EU and for Scotland. And as the First Minister made clear in his speech at the Summer Cabinet in Hoyk, Scotland does have much to gain from remaining part of the European Union, and we can look forward to a bright and prosperous future as an independent member. The EU also has much to gain from Scotland's continued membership. We do believe there is a need for reform of certain aspects of the EU, but it is best achieved from within the EU, not standing on the sidelines or issuing ultimatums. So to set out our vision for independent Scotland as part of the EU, the Scottish Government will publish its detailed white paper with positive proposals on the opportunities and gains of independence later in the autumn. Material on the referendum and the Scottish Government's proposals for an independent Scotland can be found at www.scotreferendum.com, including published papers and speeches. And this site will be regularly updated with the additional material, including the Scottish Government's white paper, in the run-up to the referendum. I wrote to the committee recently setting out the Scottish Government's action on the UK Government's Balance of Competence review. The first semester reports in the Balance of Competence review was published in July. The general weight of the evidence submitted to the first semester reports states that EU competence is, I quote, broadly appropriate in each area. I'm also pleased that a number of businesses, foreign governments and influential diplomats have made submissions to the review which support the Scottish Government's position that membership of the EU is a good thing, both in economic and political terms. We're currently preparing our responses for areas in semester 2 of the review, which includes policies such as asylum and immigration, culture, tourism and sport, and environment and climate change, and we'll share our responses with the committee soon. In addition to the progress on the balance of competences review, it's also important that we monitor the UK Government's position on the justice and home affairs opt-outs. We're also disappointed by its decision to opt out of the pre-Lisbon Treaty EU Police and Justice Cooperation measures and agree with the widely respected House of Lords EU Select Committee inquiry, which found that the UK Government has not made a compelling case for opting out. So we will continue to argue against the position, but as it seems unlikely that it will change, we are doing all we can to ensure that Scottish interests are being taken into account in the consequent negotiations to opt back in to a selection of measures from the list. So as I've outlined, the Scottish Government believes that we're better off within the EU and that any reform of it is better achieved from within. However, we also recognise that it's extremely important to ensure that when decisions could and should be taken at member state level, this is allowed to happen. So related to this, I noticed with interest the Justice Committee's examination of the proposal of the establishment of the European Public Prosecutor's Office on the 6th of September. I'm pleased that the Parliament has taken an active role in the scrutiny of EU proposals by approving a motion stating that the proposal does not accord with the principle of subsidiarity. Of course, we rely on our colleagues in Whitehall to facilitate the explanatory memorandum and scrutiny process, and I'll continue to use meetings with the JMC Europe to encourage them to share information with us in a timely and open manner. So finally, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the committee for its interest in our work to enhance Scotland's EU priorities, and I look forward to continuing to update the committee on our progress in each of the areas that I have outlined in my opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, for very comprehensive opening remarks, and I'm going to take questions from my colleagues in order, and they've got a number of areas, so that may jump about a wee bit, much like obviously your portfolio does as well. But I wanted to open very quickly with a question to you, Cabinet Secretary, about last year when we had the Minister for Europe, UK Minister for Europe at Committee, David Lidington. We raised with him our very serious concerns about the lack of communication with the Scottish Government, and when he came back to our committee at the end of June, we raised it again with him, in particular about how they communicate with the Scottish Government on any decisions that are taken, how they then facilitate Scottish Government officials and ministers and Cabinet Secretaries to participate in delegations, whether it be to informal council or council, or any of the negotiating bodies and organisations in Europe. And I'm wondering, Cabinet Secretary, if you could give us your insight into that. We didn't think it had improved that much, but maybe you could give us, because obviously you would be seeking to be part of those delegations. And I'm very worried because there's a real hardening attitude towards Europe from the UK Government, whereas in Scotland we have quite a different attitude, and whether that then impedes the job that our ministers have to do when they go to Europe.
I suppose I'd make comment that at the outset of the new UK government in 2010, I think there was a genuine appreciation that they wanted to do something differently. They wanted to behave differently and have a different type of relationships with the devolved administrations in Europe, and there was a commitment to try and improve that. And I think William Hague in particular was quite clear in his statements and correspondence with us that he wanted to see that. However, I think there's a potential difference between the operations of the FCO and other departments within Whitehall, and I think it's variable across the piece, as my reaction. We have made some improvements in relation to the Memorandum of Understanding of what's meant to happen in relation to formal councils and attendance, acceptance of attendance to requests. There's also an indication in the correspondence which I've shared with the committee that, you know, if a Scottish Government minister wants to speak on an issue, and they would be doing so on behalf of the UK to an agreed line from the UK, which would then have previously been consulted upon with the devolved administrations, that would happen. Now, what we've agreed to do is to set up a monitoring over this current period of 6 months to see how that's getting on. And by and large, we can attend, but the issues in speaking, and particularly on the big issues that are involving negotiation in key areas of agriculture and in relation to fisheries. So I think the issues are more to do with DEFRA in particular, in some of the kind of challenges that particularly Richard Lochhead has. Now, Richard Lochhead is the most experienced rural affairs minister within all the administrations. He's had that responsibility for 6 years, very important, and very much an asset to the UK government in a lot of the bilaterals in terms of the negotiations. But it does have real limitations when he's requested to speak to be able to do so. That compares and contrasts, for example, to myself and Angela Constance. So there's one committee where they seem to be quite comfortable for us to speak on behalf of the UK, and that's the similar, I suppose, a committee to this, the Education and Culture Committee in Europe. And I've spoken on behalf of the UK, and so has, and Angela Constance has led for the UK in certain areas in that area. So it is a mixed bag. I am disappointed, particularly in that it's not been extended to informal councils. A lot of the business will take place in informal councils, which is a lot one, the relationship building and some of the opportunities to drive forward some of the issues. So in my portfolio, for example, in creative industries, Scotland has a very strong story to tell. People want to hear that story, but unfortunately there's a creative industries informal coming up in Lithuania, and despite the fact that I'd previously represented under the Labour government, the Labour Westminster government, the UK at an informal on creative industries, unfortunately the UK government minister is saying at this opportunity that I won't be able to attend, which I think is a missed opportunity for them as much as anything else because of the contribution we can make. So it is a mixed bag. We still try and improve relationships. It's very important that we work well together. I think in terms of a lot of these issues, and you see it on justice in particular, because we have that separate justice system, it's really important that there are good channels of relationships between Whitehall departments. And I think the issue, to be fair, is variable across the piece. Can it be improved? Most definitely, yes. Is there a potential willingness to try and do that? I think there is. I think it's the evidence, and I think as the current administration of this current UK Westminster government progresses, I think perhaps the goodwill and enthusiasm at the outset is perhaps dissipating as we go on, and possibly coloured by some of the politics. And it's very important that as the state and as governments within the UK state, we keep our eye on, and that includes the UK government, on the service we're delivering to the people of Scotland, and focus on that and cooperate with that rather than using it in some kind of a partisan way. Now, I will still continue to argue that case, but I will keep you abreast as things go. But that's a fairly frank take on where I think things are. I don't want to be too dismissive, because I think improvements have been made, but I think there's always more to be done, and I think keeping the pressure up to do that is very, very important.
Yeah, well, the Minister, David Ludington, said that he would be happy to have any evidence from this committee that proves otherwise, that things have improved. So if there is, after your 6 months monitoring period, if there is anything that we can feed back to the UK Minister, then we'd be happy to do that through the committee, because we're across the committee very concerned about the diminishing good relations in some aspects of the work that is intergovernmental work. So, thank you very much. I'm going to go to open questions. I'm going to kick off with Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You spoke very eloquently, of course, about Scotland's role in Europe as an independent nation, and I have a particular interest in telecoms and IT and so on and so forth. And I recall over the summer there was quite a ridiculous claim about if Scotland was independent, we'd face increased roaming charges for mobile communications in Europe. And we now know, of course, that the Commission, as part of the Connected Continent programme, is pushing roaming premiums out of the market. Have you any comments you could make on that, firstly, before I ask another question?
Well, I think that's a classic example where I think the timing couldn't have been, more explicit, that some of the comments that were being made about charging for mobile phones and what would happen in independent Scotland was just blown out of the water the very same day by, as you said, the ruling and decision from the EU. A lot of these areas, in terms of competitiveness, it's really important that we can be as competitive as possible. In terms of the areas on telecommunications, I think Commissioner Kroes is about to come come out with the next step and stages, I think if that's what you're referring to in relation to some of the broadband infrastructure and telecoms. I think there's something due very, very soon in that area. It's important that we have a level playing field for a free market in lots of different areas. In many ways, that's an argument when in my years in attending European Council, we are aligned with the UK in lots of different ways. And that's why actually in terms of the positioning, we would be in terms of the increased either voting power or increased arguments that we made, we shouldn't see it as this as a displacement. This would actually you'd have the rest of the UK and then you'd have an independent of Scotland. Could well be in certain areas arguing and putting forward the same position, and that would add weight to that, free market and movement. So it's common sense, actually. A lot of this is, and again, a lot of businesses will rely on this, particularly in relation to small businesses, and that's why access to market, whether it's a physical access or indeed in terms of internet or in terms of other areas, it's really important as a country on the northwest periphery of Europe that we are seen as much central, and that's why some of the interconnectivity is really important. There may be better opportunities with independence because some of the particularly inter-country opportunities will be advanced, but that's obviously some way away, and we've obviously just got to keep an eye on those developments.
Of course, we know technology doesn't recognise any boundaries, we know that, but it's the mechanisms to increase charges, and I'm glad to see progress towards harmonising that throughout Europe. But could I just follow up, Cabinet Secretary, for a few occasions at this committee, the members have been interested in the whole IT infrastructure investment issue, and we note in your letter to the committee about the Connecting Europe initiative that there's been quite a hit on the budget for IT infrastructure, I think from €50 billion down to €30 billion, and within that, the digital allocation component of that has dropped from about 9 billion to 1 billion. Clearly that must have implications ultimately for us here in Scotland, and I note there that you're saying that we're reviewing the potential for supporting digital and other projects. So it was just to get a flavour of what the impact of that might ultimately be on Scotland and how it might impact on our own strategy to increase communications and broadband and so on in Scotland.
Well, clearly that's a responsibility for the Deputy First Minister and the infrastructure responsibilities she has. But I think obviously the committee understand that that's obviously the negotiations for the MFF. So there was movements in different budgets, and that was obviously one where there was some movement on. Part of what we had to argue internally with the UK government was what our interests are, and obviously in this one in particular, it's very important. And I have raised and I report retrospectively on some of the issues that we discussed at the JMC Europe. And at the last JMC Europe, I was concerned about, particularly on some of the broadband proposals that we had for infrastructure, particularly around the cities, and obviously in terms of the state aid issues that the UK government perhaps had not been as close to as they might otherwise have been. It's caused a bit of delay in what we're doing now. It affected us more than it affected Wales and Northern Ireland because they were further advanced in different areas. So that's part of what we have to do, is to try and negotiate in the improvements. In terms of what that means, that obviously we have to maximise what we're doing. There's a huge amount of Scottish Government investment in this area, and we want to maximise that spend, and that's what the Deputy First Minister is working hard to achieve, using obviously the opportunities with EU as well. But there is an issue around obviously the interconnectivity is a real opportunity for different states within Europe, and obviously a lot of our challenges aren't with different states, it's actually within the UK, cross-boundary and cross-border, and that's actually a lot of our emphasis obviously has to be on.
Thank you.
Okay, Hans Malik, you've got a brief supplementary.
Yeah, Cabinet Secretary, good morning, first of all. You've suggested that in the independent Scotland, the IT resource would be cheaper somehow. That would be wonderful news for my grandson, because he's always complaining about how poor the system is just now. Have you got any evidence to back that, though, in terms of figures, that it would be cheaper and possibly even better rolled out?
Much as I'd love to give you that commitment to your family, I think the point was raised actually by Willie Coffey. It's the harmonisation across Europe in terms to make sure that there isn't adverse increase costs for anybody across Europe. In terms of, and that's the harmonisation aspect that I think Willie Coffey was pointed to. So much as it would benefit the people of Scotland, it would also benefit the people elsewhere. So much as I'd like to try and promote a competitive advantage, I don't think that would be appropriate for me to do so.
Yeah, no, it's just that I mean, I know where my colleague comes from, and I also am very keen and interested to ensure that we across Scotland have a very good service, particularly in our rural areas where I think we would really benefit from it. I genuinely believe this would be a good story for us if we could roll this out nationwide. But I just, for a moment, thought that you had suggested that it would be somehow more beneficial, and I was just wondering where that was coming from.
Well, part of it is, in terms of what the Scottish Government is doing, our step change in terms of broadband infrastructure will help and improve business opportunities, as well as other aspects of IT, but primarily if you're thinking about small businesses, particularly in rural areas. Now, what we're trying to do, obviously, is reduce the overall cost and make it more competitive. That can be done in different ways. It's not necessarily done by privatising the Royal Mail, I might add, but it's certainly in terms of infrastructure, and that's why a lot of in terms of the next change, we want to have 85% of premises in Scotland with the next generation broadband by 2015 and 95% by 2017. At the same time, in terms of charges, in terms of whether it's mobile, in terms of the harmonisation of some of the prices, we can also try and make sure across Europe that it's as competitive as possible. I'd much rather we were there participating as an active member around the table discussing what that is. Currently we're not, but what we can do is try and influence where the UK government's going on in relation to that. And so therefore, in terms of costs for businesses in Europe, collectively, that's where we're at. And I think we have to be careful, much as we'd like to have cheaper charges in Scotland compared to England, or cheaper charges in Scotland compared to France, etc. It's in our interest for Europe to be competitive, because it's actually in our interest for all the economies in Europe to be more competitive compared to externally. And that's why I'm quite keen, and this government's quite keen, that we see the arguments around Europe not as a kind of very navel-gazing inward reform agenda, which is just about processes. It's actually about how Europe itself is able to compete internationally with the likes of China, India, Brazil, and the different BRIC economies, for example.
Thank you.
Jamie McGregor.
I'd like to know, Cabinet Secretary, how the Scottish Government decided on the 4 key areas identified in your action plan. And I was slightly surprised that especially with the emphasis on Scotland's food and drink at the moment, that agriculture appears to have been left off that list, with the CAP being such an enormous part of the whole EU budget. My question is really, given the focus on the 4 key policy areas that you've chosen, what flexibility is there for focusing on other issues which may be of significance to Scotland, like agriculture?
The key priorities in the action plan was developed and I think published in 2009. It was actually a criticism, I think, of government by your predecessors in this committee that perhaps the approach to Europe has been too broad brush in general. And at the time of producing the action plan and subsequently different committees have actually welcomed a kind of key drive for innovation in those 4 areas. Now, that's not to the exclusion of other areas. So I've spoken about creative industries, for example, because it's not one of the 4 priority action areas. It doesn't mean I'm not doing anything. Clearly, in agriculture, you know that Richard Lockhead is very active in that area. What this is about providing a particular focus on areas of differentiation or competitive advantage. A lot of the issues around common agricultural policy has been the general reform. It's not just about Scotland, it's about the whole of Europe. If you look at the different areas, marine environment, there is a key area, particularly in relation to fisheries. In terms of food and drink, marine environment has much of an impact, as you know, in terms of food and drink through through fishing in particular. Research and innovation, a lot of the focus on research and innovation, and particularly Horizon 2020, is mobilising research and development for SMEs. A lot of that will be, for example, in food and drink. So it's not to the exclusion, and there's absolutely no reason why, and I actually, commit my ministers to engage with you. I would encourage the committee to engage with other ministers on other areas of the portfolio. I don't know if you've ever had Richard Lockhead at this committee. Obviously, his prime responsibility is the Rural Affairs Committee in terms of his engagement, but it doesn't mean it's at the exclusion. But that's something that is important for us in government to have your reflections as a committee. We're not carrying out our activities to exclusion of other areas, but actually by focusing on 4 key areas, we've made a big impact, not just internally, but more importantly, I think, within Europe of our interest. So, for example, on the freedom justice areas, our approach to human rights is of great interest to other countries in Europe. So we've been able to focus that, and Rosanna Cunningham and Kenny McCaskill, and indeed our law officers, have been very active in that agenda. Horizon 2020, we've been able to see a big step change in our universities. Great to see the performance of our universities extended in the recent survey. But actually, when you're trying to do either a step change or competitive advantage in particular areas, being focused on those four areas has helped us. If at some point in the future you have a different view on that, it'd be really helpful to hear. But it might well be if you're interested in either creative industries or in structural funds in IT, which would be the Deputy First Minister, or indeed agriculture, you should think about the importance of engaging with the other ministers as well.
Can I just... it's not so much that I'm complaining about the areas that you've chosen. It's more to just saying about what, in my opinion, having spoken to your Cabinet Secretary, Richard Lockheed, I mean, I know how frustrated he is that there's a number of CAP-related elements which are not yet finalised, and they were meant to be finalised, you know, by now. And I'm told that the EP, the European Parliament, is unhappy that its powers of co-legislating with the Council on the CAP under the Lisbon Agreement is not being allowed to be fully exercised. And I think this is one of the problems, that they're all arguing with each other. But if anyone who reads The Scottish Farmer will know that farmers are really getting desperate now about what these elements are and how they are going to be finalised. And that's why I suppose I'm drawing your attention to that.
No, I'm absolutely fully aware of the concerns. I suppose what I'm saying is those concerns are most definitely shared in Scotland, but they're also shared by farmers in other countries. And a lot of what we do as a government is how we deal with the institutions about ongoing and CAP reform. And that's a long haul, and as you well know, one of the real challenges is that in terms of the percentages, and whether it's Pillar 1, Pillar 2, in terms of our hectare coverage, we are extremely disadvantaged by not being independent compared to what we would be in terms of that kind of idea of the averaging out of the percentages we'd have. But I mean, that we can debate, but that's a specific issue for Scotland. But a lot of what you were saying are issues that are general to the development of policy across Europe, and we do that, and we're involved every single day on a regular basis. So that's regular business for us. What the action plan does say, if we are really going to make a punch and difference in areas of either competitive advantage like energy and climate change, or in areas where we have a distinct role to play because of our separate justice system on freedom, security, that's why we're trying to have that focus. But I'm more than happy to feedback in terms of how we promote and engage on the agricultural policy areas. And it would be an interesting thing is how the Parliament works, Convener, I suppose the relationship between the Parliament, European matters which you have oversight of within the Parliament, and to what extent when we have debates, for example, in this Parliament, about the Common Agricultural Policy, do members of the European Committee speak and engage on that, or do we see that as or do we see that within this Parliament as, oh, that's just for the rural affairs people to discuss? And I'd like to see how we approach this government, one where I'm as much championing at the JMC Europe our agricultural interests when we can, as well as it being done by Richard Lockhead as the minister. But I think we should maybe reflect on ourselves as how this Parliament sees things and how siloed we are. And I think this committee has done a great deal of work in enhancing that cross-parliament integrated approach to tackling European issues. And I would encourage this committee to take a very active interest in that area.
I would have to back my colleague up in the committee that in anything to do with agriculture is usually front and centre in representing this committee's interests and obviously interests of his constituents. But maybe just to reinforce that bit of work that we do, the rapporteur systems has been working quite well, and we gave evidence to the House of Commons committee a few weeks ago who were very interested in our rapporteur system. And next week, in fact Sunday, I'm leading a delegation along with Maureen Watt, who's the convener of the Infrastructure Committee, to go and look at with some of the rapporteurs to look at the procurement legislation coming from Europe in conjunction with procurement legislation coming forward from the Scottish Government, which I think the bill has just been laid. So, and how we dovetail that and maybe, have a very coordinated approach to these two pieces of legislation. And that's part of the work that this committee has done in encouraging members of other committees to get involved in these things. So we're leading a delegation across on Sunday on that to speak to the relevant bodies. And it's something I think that we will do a lot more of in the future.
I'd be very interested to learn how you get on. So please if you can.
Yep, thanks
let me know
very
how you get on.
Yeah, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You've already mentioned in quite a bit of detail the balance of competencies review of the UK Government at the moment. It was just to gauge whether you feel that the Scottish Government's engagement with that process and stakeholders in Scotland to have a unique view of, you mentioned justice as well, how well that is working and how the Scottish Government is actually engaging in the process.
It's a very big task and quite a bureaucratic task for everybody involved. I think that's a general reflection, not just of ourselves, but also from different Whitehall areas. It's a major task. And in terms of degree of engagement, it's interesting different governments have taken different approaches because right at the early stage, because it was quite a how do I say? I think it was political in its source, but it has to be non-political in its application until the end of this government. So quite clearly, what has been stated to me by, and I've been quite specific in my questioning of UK ministers about this, is they've made it clear that there will be no conclusions by this UK government in terms of the politics of what is produced by the competences. But of course, the content of the competence review would be open to any party, political party at UK level to then inform their manifestos and for their proposals as a future UK government. So clearly, there'll be different views within the UK government in relation to what the Conservative Party might do with the content of the competence review and what the Liberal Democrat part of the UK government will do with the competence review. In terms of our engagement, I think it's the second semester I think will possibly be of more interest than the first in terms of a lot of the different areas and what's put forward. I think particularly in relation to some of the environmental areas, in terms of what we've had so far, a lot of it, as I said, in terms of the responses, most people are saying, well, look, it's fairly fit for purpose. It's not. There's nothing that's kind of outlying. We have found it, from our own point of view, we're looking at it to say, okay, how to what extent, are we satisfied with the involvement and the range, and it's we're using that for our own purposes, and I think that's the most sensible way to do that. In terms of is it engaging the body politic or stakeholders in? I quite frankly no. I don't think this is. I think because the purpose of it was this is meant to help the Conservative Party in the UK system identify some kind of review, reform, etc., to help furnish a future referendum that may happen on EU. That was I think people have been quite cynical saying that was the purpose of it. So I don't think in terms of general engagement there's been a huge amount within stakeholders in Scotland. I do welcome, however, there are different views of those that are, dare I say, those that are very close to Europe or very close to the system are obviously engaged more. But is it setting the heather alight across Scotland? I think the answer is no. But we have agreed, and again, this is an example of the cooperation that does happen as part of the memorandum of understanding with our relations with the Westminster Government. We are cooperating on the different portfolios, and can we improve what we're doing? Yes, we will try and improve what we're doing with it, and we'll share the information in terms of the areas that we're looking at. In terms of some of the areas, I think particularly environment and climate change will have been of particular interest in terms of some of the different aspects that we're looking at as to where we might go. In terms of the 5 of the 9 responses to the semester have been drafted and cleared for the next. We're obviously looking at the next, we're looking at the second level of interest. The calls for evidence are likely to go out in October for agriculture, fisheries, cohesion, free movement of services and fundamental rights. Now, you think about what Jamie McGregor's question was about. Clearly, I think once you get into the areas of agriculture, fisheries, you might get more of a more active engagement by some of the stakeholders as to what the interests are. So I think what I'm saying is the first set of semester was perhaps not as engaging as perhaps some of the other subject areas. Do you want to say anything, Colin? Are you wanting to?
In terms of the approach, I mean, we've been working actually quite closely with the officials from Whitehall in order to help inform the debate. And there has been some stakeholder engagement in meetings that we've had in Edinburgh, for example, on civil justice. There was some involvement in relation to environment and in relation to the single market, freedom of movement of goods. It's a process whereby the UK government is seeking to gather as objective information as possible and to reflect that in its reports. And that came through very strongly, actually, from the first round that was published. I think it was the 20th of July, where it showed that most of the evidence that was gathered, supported the level of competence. But maybe just to add one point to what the Cabinet Secretary said, it is interesting, particularly our environmental work has shown strong support for many aspects of the way in which the European policy works, but also a clear recognition that having a European policy doesn't mean that every aspect has to be legislated at European level or that Europe has to engage in great detail in the implementation of policy. That's an area where the approach that's been taken in Scotland, for example, with regard to better regulation has led to a more effective and efficient implementation of the area. So that leads into the subsidiarity points and proportionality that have been raised.
But it's quite a challenge for, I presume, for you as a committee, is how you review what we're doing, which is a review of what the Westminster Government is doing, and we could be reviewing each other forever. However, it might well be, there might be specific, rather than have to look at everything, there might be specific subject areas, whether it's from Jamie McGregor's point of view, agriculture, or another area, you might want to drill down a wee bit, just in one or two areas that are of particular interest to the committee, to get a sense of where the competencies review or the evidence is. But that would be obviously for you to determine as a committee. But it's such a large piece of work. I think it might be better to focus on key areas of interest if you want to take forward your interest in the competencies.
Jamie wants to make a quick supplementary.
But, well, we all understand at the moment that the UK government retains responsibility for European affairs. Under the Concordat, Scottish ministers do have access and do have a voice. I mean, the Cabinet Secretary herself has access to UK ministers. Are you finding that this access to UK ministers that you have under the present arrangement is unsatisfactory?
I think in terms of the competences, in a sense, my relations will be primarily with William Hague and David Lidington, and primarily at the JMC Europe, and primarily their focus is not to drill down in all the subject areas, but to make sure the management of the process is happening between all the Whitehall departments and with the devolved administrations. So that, I think that relationship is fine. In relation to, because the balance of competencies, I don't think is the most controversial thing under the sun, to be quite frank, in terms of so far. Some of the areas that I'm saying that are coming up may well lead to more interest. But in terms of the, in terms of generally, it's variable. If there's something immediate happens, and quite issue again, this is to relation government to government. Say something in animal health, or something that's it has to be dealt with, matters of public health, or things that are absolutely critical for emergency situations. Of course, those relationships will happen very quickly and promptly and competently between everybody. In terms of areas about access to the future planning of European fisheries policy, for example, or agriculture policy, or some of the longer term issues, that's where we have more difficulty in trying to make sure that there's pre-agreed lines. Now, I don't want to overgeneralise, because I do think it's variable from department to department, and that's as much to about the officials within the Whitehall departments, who I think have probably only latterly, some of them, and no disrespect to officials generally, I might add, but there's I think they've only more latterly wakened up to devolution as a concept, because for so much of devolution, it was a Labour government and in the UK and a Labour government in Scotland, so it was more continuity. I think in terms of what happened in 2010, I distinctly remember sitting around the table with David Cameron and Nick Clegg and the devolved administrations, and there was every colour of political party under the sun by the time you had the DUP, Sinn Féin, Plaid Cymru and ourselves. Now that meant that the actual mechanics of devolution had to be more acutely operational, because you were dealing with different political partners, and that's why I think I'm being fairly, I'm being fair and generous to the incoming UK government by the fact that they were very conscious of that coming in, because of the different variability of the political parties. But I do think in certain areas that are of strategic importance to Scotland is very frustrating. That in some areas, particularly in relation to whether it's and particularly in relation to DEFRA, I think that's the department that we could and should have far better relationships than we have. There is a very good fisheries minister in the UK government. I'm not saying that he's not. All I'm saying is that in terms of being able to use the expertise that we have and in terms of our prime interest, and that's because institutionally the interests of the UK government are such that they would be prepared to negotiate of the interests of the UK as a whole, and they are not necessarily coincidental, and certainly on some areas they might not be. And that's understandable because it's the city-state of London pulls so much of an interest, not just from Scotland but elsewhere, and so therefore the priorities for UK will be different. I've given you an example in creative industries, which I think is just is disappointing, and it's a missed opportunity. But at the end of the day, we're responsible governments. We're going to have a good relationship post-independence as much as we have pre-independence, and it's in our interest, whether it's the UK government or any others, to operate in a professional and competent manner. But I don't want to. Is there room for improvement? Most definitely, yes. Is a coincidence of interest? Sometimes, not always. Where there's difference of opinions, can it have quite a major impact on Scotland and Scottish interests, whether it's in relation to marine, and the priority areas that we've got here. I'll give you an example: freedom and justice and home affairs, and the opt-outs. I've already given you examples where quite clearly, you can make the representations, you can speak, and they can say, we've heard what you say, but if they do something different that's not in Scotland's interests, that's still not in Scotland's interests. And that's where obviously the opt-outs in relation to justice has been a real problem for us. So if you're trying to invite me to be to complain too much, I want to do so more specifically in particular areas, but we will work hard to improve the relationship. And I do think there's a genuine attempt by some of the ministers, and I think you heard from David Lennington, he does want to attempt to have an improved relationship. But if he can't make his Whitehall ministers sometimes do what he would like to do, dare I say.
Hanzala, quick supplementary?
No, it's not a supplementary, it's actually a question, and it was in regards to your opening statement in relation to our relationship with the European Union. And there was a very clear suggestion that after the referendum, it may be a better relationship if the vote was a yes one. And I was just wondering, in terms of European policy, whether we are members or not members, directly or indirectly, what I'm more keen to find out is how do we secure our membership of the European Union? Because the British government's been warned by overseas interests, business interests, namely Japan was very vocal about loss of jobs in the UK. And I'm just wondering, what steps do we take to ensure that we are not penalised in one way or the other, regardless of which situation we find ourselves in? Because that's a challenge in itself. Whether we're part of the UK or not, we still need to protect our industry. And so my concern is double-edged. One is, if we're part of the UK, how do we protect ourselves if the UK decides to come out of the European Union, which is probably unlikely, but nevertheless there's still a danger because there is talk about it, and when there is talk about it, we need to be serious about what implications are there for us in Scotland. And also in regards to a yes vote in the referendum, how do we secure a membership, and what steps have we taken to ensure that there is a smooth transaction for that period?
I think it's a very important question. I think it's a key question about the kind of future of Scotland and its European relations, and I think the most secure way that we have of ensuring that we have continued European membership is to become independent, because there is a very real risk that in terms of the political pressures that are already happening, the Pandora's box is open. David Cameron has given a signal that he wants to have that European referendum. Now, he may argue he wants to maintain European membership from it, but he's invited that opposition, and it all depends on I think a number of events of where some of the politics down south go. In terms of our mechanism for doing that, we will set out in the white paper our proposals, and they will be consistent with the legal advice that we have been given. In relation to the UK and the EU, I am very concerned. I am seriously concerned, because a lot of what we're trying to do, and it's in the key areas in our action plan, climate change, energy, is to attract businesses to invest in Scotland, particularly manufacturing for wind turbines, for offshore wind, or for different areas of our competitive advantage. And if they, as a footprint in the European market. And I think we're very well placed to do that. Anything that sends up signals that there'd be any question mark over that from the UK government is very worrying indeed. And I get raised in my travels as much concern about that than anything else. That's the real concern people have. Now, in terms of the overtures and in terms of what the UK government are stating, they obviously are trying to, within Europe, put a more pro-European argument. But obviously domestically it becomes a more anti-European argument, and people aren't after in terms of seeing the different emphasis. I think I make it quite clear when I'm operating internationally that I do so within the UK foreign policy. That's the agreement that we operate on in terms of the Scotland Act, in terms of our responsibilities, and it's quite clear in terms of my statements, as it is by the UK government, that the proposals for a referendum come from it's not the UK government's position, it is a position of David Cameron should a Conservative Party be re-elected in a future Westminster government, because quite clearly even within the current UK government there's differences of opinion. But I do think that it's really important that we set out the importance, as I said, of our exports, the huge proportion of our exports within the European Union, really important. We are, one of the strengths of Scotland's economy is the fact that we've got such a strong position in relation to our exports. It gives us that strong balance of payments position that's been referred to in a lot of the debates just recently. So therefore it is particularly in our interests that we maintain good relations and that we have that positive access in that market. So a lot of this, as we know, is political. It's not necessarily about what people would want to see, and David Cameron has stated that he would want to remain as part of the EU. But I think in terms of the domestic politics that are driving this, which are different from Scotland, we're not having the same debates. I don't think you do not have the same debates on EU and EU membership, even in this Parliament, even cross-party in this Parliament, as you do at Westminster. So again, it shows you the differences of why we need to have that opportunity to set our own position. But I think your point was well made. I thought the Japanese intervention was one of the strongest, and we've seen that also from the US, which was, I think, quite striking as well in terms of the importance they see of the UK, whether it's whether it's the rest of the UK or the UK remaining within the European Union. And it would be in the interests of an independent Scotland, I might add, as well. Because we would want to see
that was the point I was trying to bring you close to. Whilst I'm very agreeable with the four main points that we've picked up initially, I think initially that's a good stance to be taking. However, what I am concerned about is the timetabling and the framing of membership of the European Union. I think it's very important that, that the whole package needs to be in place. At the moment, I don't think that there is anything. Correct me if I'm wrong. And in the absence of that, I have to be honest with you, I'm very fearful for our industry.
Well, in terms of Scotland's position, remember, we've been a member for 40 years. In lots of areas, we're already administering, transposing. You'll see it in the papers.
Scotland that's been a member.
We're transposing so much of our of EU legislation on a regular basis. We do that on a regular basis, and we're compliant with the EU Agri community in a whole range of areas. So in terms of preparations, we're in a strong position. But also in terms of the 18-month period between a yes vote in September 18th and the date of that legal independence being in March 2016, that 18-month period is an extensive period. It's much longer than many other processes for different countries. And indeed, Professor James Crawford, who was the academic that advised the UK government about some of these issues, he himself has made clear that 18 months is a perfectly reasonable time for the arrangement. And of course, remember that the arrangements that we're going to have to make is probably more in relation to voting numbers, number of MEPs, those kind of issues. And part of that preparation is that transition. It's more about the transition, and that 18-month period is plenty of time for some of those transitions. But we will remain. It's within a continuity approach in terms of remaining, because it's important for our businesses. It's important for our people. But we've been members for 40 years, and that's what we want to continue. And also importantly, from the UK, I think it's in our interest that the UK also continue its membership.
Thank you for that. I've made my point and you've made yours, and I'm happy with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rod Campbell.
Secretary, I'd like to just follow on actually from Hamzala's point a bit in connection with obviously David Cameron's statement in January about if the Conservative government is re-elected, it will pursue negotiations and resolve those negotiations to the UK electorate in an in-out referendum. Granted, as you correctly said, this is a Conservative Party pledge, not a UK government pledge. Notwithstanding that, and notwithstanding that we have a referendum coming up in just under a year's time, has there been any kind of dialogue at a government level about the implications of that pledge for the referendum itself?
Implications for which referendum?
Scottish referendum.
We've made it quite clear our concerns about David Cameron's remarks. We've said that publicly, we've also said that privately, and also I've fed back the concerns that I've heard across Europe in relation to the UK's position. But I think at the end of the day, we concentrate on our referendum and we deliver our referendum. And I think the certainty of a clear decision by the Scottish people to be independent in September 18 is the clearest and more direct position to take if you want to remain as a member of the European Union, because the threats otherwise, I think, are, as Hansala mentioned, it's very worrying. But I think we need to be very certain about what we're doing as the Scottish people, and I think the certainty of a yes vote would mean that we're making a quite clear signal that we see our future as part of a Europe, as albeit in a reformed Europe, but one where our exports and our citizens' interests are best protected. But as you know, in these wider issues, the UK government is not wanting to pre-negotiate anything, let alone putative referendum that they may hold if there's a Conservative Party re-elected post. So there's, I've said before, there are certainties and uncertainties in different sides of the constitutional argument. There are as many, if not more, uncertainties in relation to Europe from the unionist position than anywhere else. And I think people need to be quite alert and acute to the risks and the uncertainties of the UK continuing in terms of the Union as part of the European Union. People are very acute to that in terms of, as Hansala said, in terms of business interests, and that's why many different businessmen have contacted the UK government to express their concerns. And in terms of that area, that was an open letter indeed that Richard Branson, Laura Kerr, Dame Helen Alexander, Michael Rake, Roger Kerr, Nigel Shinwold, Andrew Kahn, these are business people in relation to some of our major industries, and their concern was a letter written about what the UK government, or as I said, the Conservative Party, should it be re-elected as a UK government, would take. So the certainties that we need can be provided by independence, because we're quite clearly want to see our future as a central part, because our key industries, in terms of renewable energies, in terms of marine, in terms of agriculture, are going to be best served by that direct relationship. And that is a certainty and a direction, a clear direction, that I think people will positively respond to.
Just in relation to the balance of competences review, has there been any kind of dialogue between the Scottish Government and the administrations in Northern Ireland and Wales on the balance of competences review?
Yes, as part of the JMC Europe, because obviously when the UK government decided that they wanted to do this, that was part of the discussions that we had collectively. There are varying degrees of enthusiasm and very little, might add, political enthusiasm for the exercise. However, responsible cooperation has taken place, and I can't speak and shouldn't speak on behalf of the Welsh or the Northern Irish government, but everybody's cooperating with the Competences Review. Obviously, there are different degrees of powers within the different devolved administrations. So would it be useful to do a comparison between what the feedback is from the devolved administrations? Probably yes. I suspect that's more of an exercise for academics that are involved in the European sector to see what the differences are. I personally have not taken an overview as to what the input has been. I think there's been more probably at official level discussions about how the different administrations are working on that. Colin, are you aware of that?
Yes, we've had discussions, and again in the JMC officials context at a recent away, and it will be discussed again at a meeting in London on the 24th of September.
It's been mostly at official level.
And finally, Greece, I think, is taking over from Lithuania. next presidency in the beginning of January, which, given Greece's situation, might be quite interesting. Have there been any discussions as yet, or any indications as to what the priorities will be under that administration?
They will obviously set out their priorities themselves as a presidency. I took the opportunity to visit the Greek ambassador in one of my visits to London. Clearly financial issues are of key concern to them for the reasons that you said. But you know, they will set out what their plans are. Obviously, in terms of, it will be the tail end presidency before the change of the Parliament Commission, etc. So obviously the Lithuanian presidency is going to be very important. The Irish presidency was very successful and actually, you know, delivered on a number of different key areas. Obviously the Lithuanian presidency, and just to indicate, we've also seconded some of our officials to support that presidency as well. They will be able to drive forward a great deal, and obviously the Greek presidency will need to make sure that the things are kind of completed in time for the change of the Commission and Council, I suspect.
Cabinet Secretary, always having an eye to the future on this committee, we have actually invited the Greek ambassador to come to committee, and they have agreed to come probably late January next year, so just perfect timing for their presidency as well. And we're looking forward to having a Lithuanian delegation here and an event for Croatia at the end of October. So many things going on with our international work on this committee, but obviously in conjunction with the Parliament and yourself. So is there anything else that you think that this committee should be picking up on? Certainly we've got a number of areas that, from your evidence today, that I think we will follow up on in respect to the areas that all of my colleagues questioned. John, Jamie, you want something to come in quickly? We're just about out of time. So.
The last time that we had the European discussions were made over things like the CAP, the UK government was able to produce 4 different systems, one for Scotland, one for Wales, one for Northern Ireland, and one for England, to do with CAP payments. Now, is there any evidence that this is taking place again?
That's something I can obviously consult with Richard Lockhead to see what that is. I suspect, but of course remember... Each
of these systems was considered to be the best for that particular area of the UK.
But of course you remember, I mean, you're very conscious of the differences in terms of the landmass that Scotland has and some of the kind of real issues, I suppose, to hill farmers in particular and sheep farmers, in relation to the differences, the different focuses on agriculture, but quite clearly in agriculture, the reason there had to be different systems is because Scotland was losing out so much in relation to the hectare proportions that they should have been getting had they been judged along other member states, and so therefore there had to be internal readjustments. It's a bit like the structural funds. The UK have had to do internal readjustments in order to make sure that there's a bit of more fairness and equity. Now the problem, as we all know in terms of Scotland, is our farmers have lost out historically. So, as you said, the 4 different systems may have been required in order to have that rebalancing, but would it not be better to change the system completely rather than have to try and do an internal rebalancing that still leaves our farmers left out? Now, we'll take a different political view on that. I understand it's not necessarily, it's not my portfolio, it's Richard Lockhead's, but in terms of where things are progressing in terms of the internal allocation post the finalisation of a cap formula, I'm happy to make sure the Scottish Government officials, or indeed the Cabinet Secretary, writes to the committee to give you an update as to where we think things are in relation to the new set of funding proposals.
I think, Cabinet Secretary, that would be welcomed by this committee. There's a keen interest across all portfolios in what's happening. I know that the Agricultural Committee of this Parliament have raised grave concerns about the formula for CAP going forward. So maybe that bit of work from the Cabinet Secretary, maybe a conversation with our colleagues on the other committee will maybe inform our work. Can I say thank you very much on behalf of the committee members for your attendance at committee today. I think we've had a very in-depth and robust exchange of views and questions, and certainly the information that's came back from the Scottish Government has been very helpful to inform us. And as always, if there's anything that you can share with the committee and anything that we can share, that will be without question. And thank you to you and your officials for coming along this morning. Thanks very much. I'm going to suspend committee for a couple of minutes just for changeover and a quick comfort break, but just a few minutes. So if you could be back in your seats in a few minutes, thanks. Okay, welcome back to committee, and moving on very swiftly to agenda item 3, because we have quite a full agenda from now on, is a paper on our foreign languages learning and primary skills inquiry, which I think was a very successful inquiry. We now have a response from the Scottish Government, and I think we should consider that response and note it. If I can refer you to paper 3 in your papers, and if any members get any comments or questions on the report?
Yeah, can I say? I think it's a good idea that the Scottish Government will update our committee. And I think it's a very good idea also that the Scottish Government's response is forwarded to those who engaged in the inquiry. I think it's good.
Yeah.
It keeps people up to date.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the British Deaf Association response, given that BSL became such a relevant topic at the conference that day, is certainly something we should forward for comment as well, and ask our stakeholders to come back to us with their comments. Any other?
Well, I think the inquiry sort of breaks new ground, so I think it's important, very important, to check that it's working. Or isn't, you know, whatever's happening to it is monitored, that's all.
Yeah. I think clear.
It's a very comprehensive response to the report, which is very welcome from the Scottish Government. I think the Education and Culture Committee, which I also sit on, is taking a little bit of interest in the funding going forward for the programme. So I'm glad that the Scottish Government has responded to how it's working with COSLA in that area. I think perhaps maybe one of the only concern I have coming out of this is maybe around underperformance in the areas of Erasmus and Comenius, and I know the Cabinet Secretary in a letter to committee specifically highlighted those areas, and I wonder going forward if there's more this committee could be doing to maybe investigate how Erasmus and Comenius have been promoted in Scotland.
Yeah, I think raising awareness is the main point for me as well, and I think the schools that we all visited seem to be pretty switched on into what was available for them, and some others weren't. And it's how do we use the work of this committee and this report to disseminate that, maybe through COSLA, maybe through contacting the schools and the local authorities that we visited and ensuring that they all have a copy of the report and draw their attention to the Comenius and Erasmus programme. That maybe be a way to raise awareness. Is the committee content to do that? Willie?
Thanks, Convener. I mean, I think the extent of the response from the Scottish Government is really quite welcome, because members will recall the amount of work we did put in as a committee. It was a substantial piece of work that we carried out, so I'm really quite pleased at the detail of the response that we've got here. And as usual, Convener, I'd like to just pick out one item there on page 7. It was relating to the question I raised during committee about GLOW, the use of the GLOW IT resource. I mean, I know GLOW can be used for other areas of the curriculum too, but I note in that response there that we seem to be considering updating the service. Now, I'm not quite sure what the issue is, whether it's content or whether the software itself just needs to be refreshed. But I think the response in there is encouraging. I take some encouragement from that along with Education Scotland will be revisiting this to improve it for future years. I think it could play a crucial part in the Modern Languages Initiative, as with others. So I think just a watching eye on how this develops would be welcome, I think, for the committee members.
Just two, Chair. One is, sorry, beg your pardon.
Sorry, it started. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. No, there was just two comments. One is in terms of twinning, e-twinning between schools. I think I'm very keen to see how that progresses, because I think that's a cost-effective way of communicating with people and actually making friends. You don't just talk to people. When you talk to people and you have a face in front of your screen, you develop relationships, and I think that's a very valuable asset. The other thing that I see that's maybe not here is the common factor in most of Europe is Arabic, believe it or not. I mean, that's a common language now, right across Europe, and there isn't any uptake of that as well. And I think e-twinning, again, may be a solution. I don't know. Perhaps we can ask some of the schools to see how they get on with that process.
Okay. Okay, Rod.
Just in relation to foreign language assistance, obviously we did have a bit of discussion about the reasons for their decline, and also I noticed the Scottish Government's comment that the decision to take them rests with local authorities, and anecdotal evidence suggests that reductions were linked to local authority budget decisions. So just to highlight that, and obviously the importance really of having a proper and increasing number of foreign language assistants to get this project moving in an effective way.
Okay, a couple of things there. One of the real benefits of social media was that this language inquiry actually triggered a very good debate on the Scottish Parliament's Facebook page, with many hits, and I think we pushed on the record a wee bit of how many people were having that conversation. And I think maybe we'll have a conversation with our media team, especially Sal, to see if there's any way of uploading the report, or the link to the report more likely, onto the Facebook page, which allows those people who, you know, from outside that joined in the social media conversation to have a look at the report as well, and get some feedback from that point of view. The other,
proposing we put the response from the government up there as well. Yes, that's excellent.
Yeah, I mean, the report, I think, is published pretty widely anyway, but yeah, the response for the government. The other thing that we can do is, a number of questions have been asked this morning, and a bit further clarification. We can ask the Scottish Government to do that in their first update, because they did say that they would update us and you know, on their progress. So the first update on that, we can ask them to give us an update on the questions raised. Committee content to forward to the Scottish Government's response to all of those who engaged in inquiry, notwithstanding some of the ideas that we've come up with here, including those. Consider the Scottish Government's regular updates at future meetings, including asking for an update on the specific questions asked today, and to forward to the British Deaf Association for their comment. Committee content to do that?
Yep. Can we then going to write to COSLA?
Yes,
specifically about it as well.
And I think we should write to COSLA specifically and draw an awareness to Comenius and Erasmus as a main point. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, content? Yep, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 4, which is our China plan inquiry, which is the response to our inquiry report from the Scottish Government. So we're getting lots of responses from the Scottish Government this morning. This inquiry was to look at the Scottish Government's country plans, and we focused very much on China, and we focused very much on industry and business, with some very good visits to companies as well. And there's quite a comprehensive response from the Scottish Government, again, actually offering some resolution to some of the issues that we raised, and specifically with the company who raised the individual issue, the Scottish Government officials actually dealing with that. So I'm very pleased to see that, and note at this time that this report was written, and the report initially was written by Lauren, and got absolutely amazing coverage in the media. We ran a very good experiment of having an embedded reporter in Colin Donald from the Herald business pages, which seemed to work extremely well, and it meant this report was given a bit of gravitas, not just from the point of view of the committee doing the work, but from the clerks who did the work into the report as well. So to see quite a comprehensive response for the Scottish Government actually addressing some of the challenges is very welcome indeed, and I welcome any comments from my colleagues. Willie, sorry.
It's well covered by the response, I think.
Willie Coffey.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to make a comment on the recommendation about direct air links between China and Scotland. I'm pleased to see the response from the Scottish Government there, and I understand Minister Hamza Yousaf actually held talks with is it Vice Minister Jia in China about that matter. So we're clearly progressing this, but of course we're also reliant too in this issue of air passenger duty being resolved, and the response from the Scottish Government there informs us that that can be about £83 per passenger. Now that's a significant deterrent to establishing these direct air links, and I would really hope that colleagues could impress upon their colleagues in the UK Government to really take a serious look at this, because the potential for Scotland with the direct air links to China could be quite amazing. So it's to welcome the response from the Scottish Government, but again to back up their calls for the UK to have a closer look at this air passenger duty issue.
Claire Adamson.
Right, thank you, Convener. I also sit in the education, I've said it many times in this committee, the Education Culture Committee, and I think the section that deals with the educational links and importance and what's going on with the institutions there, both at education and the cultural level, are hugely important. So I wonder if the Convener would write to the Education Culture Convener just highlighting the report and the implications it has for that committee as well.
Okay. Any more comments? Jamie.
Well, there was just one comment. Recommendation 9 The committee would welcome updates on the government's investigation of the hubs option and details of any advances made in developing existing hubs. And the reply was that the SDI has an office in Hong Kong, and this works closely with our 3 other offices, etc. During the evidence we took, we definitely heard that the companies that seem to be, like for example Marine Harvest, doing well in China, already had offices there, and that's not mentioned in this report. And I think it possibly should be, in terms of you know, describing how anybody with a base of their own in China is at a distinct advantage. And it's not necessarily, not everything, in other words, has to be done through the government offices.
Okay, suggestion is that we maybe write to the Scottish Government and ask them to map where the offices are, and we can have a look at, you know, where they are in geographical terms and compare that. But I think the
my point, more my point is that some businesses don't necessarily rely on government help, but rather have already got their own basis there. That's it. It's just the inference of I remember this was brought forward as an important point, that one company did better than another company because it already had links with China. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the point on the hubs is a number of companies have head offices in Hong Kong, and for newer companies having that stepping stone into China was very, very important. So having the hubs there. So
no, I agree with that
I think
entirely.
We should write to the Scottish Government and ask for a bit of a mapping exercise to see where that is. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Claire Adamson.
Convener, Jimmy makes a very, very important point, and I do think that was actually covered in their report, and I think we have to remember this as Scottish Government's response to that report, but happy to follow through on the mapping.
Okay, any other action that we should raise with the Scottish Government other than the questions we've raised this morning? Rod?
Just in relation to the recommendation, recommendation 6 on the tax rebates issue, I don't know how we would actually just keep a handle on what's going on with that. So the Foreign and Commonwealth Office talking to Tom Duncan, but it may be we perhaps just want to ask the Scottish Government if they could keep us advised of any information they receive on this issue.
Okay, content with that course of action? We've got all the things raised there. Okay, content? Yeah. Moving on to agenda item 5, which is our Brussels Bulletin. So we've got the latest edition here, and I would like committee members to note and welcome Charles Abbott, who is with us today. And Charles is the man who puts together the Brussels Bulletin, so we're delighted to have him along to committee today. And maybe we should be very gentle on how we view the Brussels Bulletin. We actually value it very much, Charles. But if members have got any comments, questions or issues they would wish to raise in the Brussels Bulletin, Rod?
Good morning. Any indication as to how Mr Barroso's comments on the State of the Union have been received in Europe-wide?
Charles is just in the gallery today,
right,
so
okay.
he can't give you direct answers. So if we raise the questions here, we then our process is to pass them on to Scotland Europa. So
maybe I just flagged that one up for further comment.
okay.
Yeah.
Did you catch that? Claire Adamson.
No, I'm fine. Just now.
Okay.
Managed to miss
Billy
my
Coffey.
bulletin, which I'm trying to get.
Thank you. Willie Coffey.
Could I just follow up on the point I raised with the Cabinet?
I'm so sorry, Convener. Could I just refer, is it possible to go back to the China plan, or are we past that now?
We've moved on.
We've moved on.
Yeah,
Too
sorry.
late. All right.
We're time's very, very tight.
Okay.
But if there's a question, you can have a chat at the end. If we've got some time at the end, we can have a follow-up. Willie.
Aye, thanks again, Convener. Just to follow up on the point I raised with the Cabinet Secretary on the whole IT infrastructure budget, I mean, can I use a good Scottish word and say that it got a scalping? And I'm really interested in how other members of the European Union are addressing that, because clearly, with such a reduction from 9 billion to 1 billion for certain components of the IT infrastructure rollout, that must be having implications throughout Europe. And the Cabinet Secretary tried well, she certainly explained really how we're approaching this matter, but I'm kind of interested in what the implications are and the impacts it's having in Europe, if any.
Okay, we can raise that. Rod?
Just in terms of the roaming proposals, again, it would be quite helpful for this committee to give an update on the progress with these proposals generally.
Claire Adamson.
Sorry about that, Claire. I managed to misplace my bulletin between my room and the committee. The two areas that I had thought were of particular interest was the internationalising of higher education across European, which I think could have quite significant impact for what we're doing here in Scotland. And I think it mentions again the Erasmus programme, which I think is going to be hugely important going forward. And I think given the very good results for Scottish universities in the world rankings, I think we could quite have an influence on how that policy is taken forward in Europe. And the other area I thought was interesting to highlight was the creative industries, hugely important to Scotland, and noting that the budget had been agreed for that going forward. So we've probably got some areas of work maybe in my other committee to do along that area. So thank you.
Okay, the only thing that I had that other than the points already raised was the issue about unemployment, which is the European Council of Ministers has proposed to extend the European Globalisation Fund to include workers made redundant as a result of the economic crisis, which I think could be very welcome. I know that this fund doesn't come without its challenges and issues, and there is a proposal to basically review and reorganise the whole thing in the coming years. But I think it's certainly something we should highlight to the Scottish Government and ask the Scottish Government how are they inputting into this, because it could obviously, there's 3.5 billion euros over the period 2007 to 2013, with 3 billion proposed going forward in a future top-up of about £1 billion as well. So there's a lot of euros in there that we should maybe be accessing. We should maybe contact the Scottish Government, given the Scottish Government's overarching proposal and increasing economic growth and especially targeting young people, and some young people that have been made redundant as a result of the economic crisis. I think would be something very important to highlight to the Scottish Government and possibly other committees of this Parliament. Any more? Hansala.
Chair, it just reminds me of the decision we had made that we would want to employ someone who would have expertise in European issues, and particularly in guiding people on how to acquire various funds and so on. And I think this is part and parcel of that as well, that they could actually advise on this as well. I'm just wondering how far that is, how far have we got with that?
Well, you'll be delighted to know that I have it confirmed from the Scottish Government that they are indeed employing someone to take on that role. So we will get an update on what that role means and the job, basically the job specification, and how it will have an impact on some of the issues and challenges that we've raised over the past 2 years.
Fantastic. Is there a job spec going to be put together and sent round?
I'm not sure. It's something we can look for. Okay. Colin Imrie, Katie's just reminded me, Colin Imrie did give us some information on the briefing and the business planning day, so we can have a look at what he said there and update you. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, people happy with the Brussels Bulletin? Happy. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you again to Scotland Europa and Charles for putting that together. It's a very valuable contribution to our committee work. Moving on very swiftly to agenda item 6, which is a draft budget scrutiny, and we are going to consider our approach to the scrutiny of the Scottish Government's draft budget for 2014-15, and I refer you to paper 6. If you can have a look at paper 6 and give me your comments, questions, ideas, would be very helpful.
Happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the one or t'other have already confirmed that we will have a Cabinet Secretary or the Minister there, so and we can focus on the particular aspects of that area of the budget. Anything else? People content with our approach to scrutiny then? Yep. Excellent. There we go. Thank you very much. And moving on to agenda item 7, which is Scottish Government's white paper on independence relating to the European Union. And you know that we did agree at our business planning day to have one of our initial first inquiries, because I think we'll do a series of mini inquiries to look at Scotland's place in Europe. So in advance of beginning the inquiry, we are looking at appointing an advisor to the committee. And we've got... Yeah. I don't know where I've done that one. There must be a...
We have an advisor.
There must be a report stealer out today somewhere, I think. You've got your paper 7 and your papers, which has a couple of recommendations at point 4. The recommendations to agree formally that it would like to appoint an advisor and to seek, obviously, the approval from Parliamentary Bureau to do that. And there's a job spec, job description attached. If anyone has got, I think it's pretty comprehensive, and we'll be doing well to find someone with all of these skills and talents. But I think for this particular inquiry, we do need someone who has got in-depth knowledge of Europe and all the facets that go along with that. So, committee content to take forward the idea of an advisor and happy with the job spec? Yep. The thing that I'd ask for committee colleagues to consider is if they have anyone that they would suspect would like to be an advisor, if in your travels you've come across someone who has all of these skills and abilities and would be interested in doing it, if you could let Katie know, let the clerks know as soon as possible, please, and we can get job descriptions and CVs put together for the committee to consider who we would like as our advisor. Jamie?
Or he or she would need to be impartial.
Yeah, of course, of course.
And how would they be chosen? I mean, would they come before? Who would interview them?
Yeah. There's a selection of CVs, and we discuss that. So we decide. Okay. Yeah. Content with that, Jamie?
Very content.
Could I have this in software? Can you email me this?
Yeah, it was emailed out last Friday.
Was it?
In your papers, yeah. Okay, members agreed to take that forward. Excellent. And I'm going to briefly suspend the committee while we go into private session. I'm sorry for the people who have just joined us, but we did agree to take agenda item 8 in private. So a brief suspension to allow the public gallery to clear. And thank you so much for coming along today.